Welcome back to Nature Labs and our live coverage of the 2025 Newfoundland and Labrador provincial election, where we're trying to help you understand those hard to define terms that we hear on the news and contextualize what this all means in relation to what you're learning in class and of course what it means for our country as a whole. So what are we learning so far? Well, we're getting a few results coming in, but they're coming in at a trickle. But you must remember that the way votes are counted, it's a slow process to make sure that our elections are fair and accurate. And of course, we're extremely lucky in Canada to have fair, demonstrably accurate elections. So those results will take some time, especially in those rural ridings. And of course, that's important to remember when we're looking at the results. What we see on the TV right now in terms of who's in the lead, we're looking at small percentages of each riding's votes being tabulated, percentages of polling stations within percentages of ridings. So it's not an accurate snapshot of where this election will go overall. We can see some trends. The PCs, the Progressive Conservatives, maybe doing better than some people were expecting. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see how that ends up at the end of the night. But the important thing to remember is that when we look at these elections and the assumed results we think we're going to see, of course, are based on polls. And polls are, there are a science, but they're an imperfect science. And the reason is of course, to remember that polls are a snapshot in time. So how people felt a couple of weeks ago or yesterday even isn't necessarily how people actually feel when they walk into the ballot box. You never know how different ideas have marinated in people's heads and led to a different result when they mark their ballot. The other thing to remember about polls is that they rely on a sample size. And in a small province like Newfoundland and Labrador, that sample size by its very nature is going to be smaller than, say, the sample size of a poll for a federal election. So while polls federally might be more accurate than a poll in, say, Newfoundland and Labrador, that's why. The other thing to remember is poll aggregates. That's third parties who take the results of different pollsters and add them together to give us a projection of who they think will win an election when those polls translate into votes in ridings and then into, of course, the seat counts that determine who forms governments. So in the aggregate, people have been saying that the Liberals were more likely to form a majority government than the Progressive Conservatives. But again, that's relying on multiple sample sizes over different moments in time. So it's an imperfect science to be taken with a grain of salt, but a helpful idea of where trends are going. The other thing to remember, though, about when we're talking about polls is who's being polled. And of course, we're seeing increasingly in elections that younger voters, your demographic, and those who are a bit older than you who can vote already, are increasingly supporting conservative parties, provincially or federally. And of course, young people are notoriously not great at showing up for voting, and they're also not very good at answering their phones for pollsters who are trying to understand what people's voting intentions might be. That's another reason to remember that the polls probably are going to favor the Liberals a bit more than the Conservatives because you're more conservative and because you don't necessarily answer pollsters' calls. So that's all a bit of context to keep in mind when we're seeing these results. Doesn't mean the Liberals can't win, doesn't mean the Conservatives can't win. It means it's early days and we have some trend lines, but of course those trends are somewhat weighted by what we expect the trends to be because of the polls we've already seen. One final thing, we've seen the results of the youth vote. Yes, what the votes that you've been casting in your classrooms, especially if you're living in, or obviously if you're living in Newfoundland and Labrador, you've decided to award that the Progressive Conservative Party with a government. Now, of course, you don't actually have the ability to vote, but it does show again the demonstration that young people are increasingly backing conservative parties. The popular vote was a much more even result. In fact, the Liberals narrowly won that popular vote. But when that vote is broken out into seats, it showed that, in fact, the progressive conservative vote amongst your demographic was far more efficient than the Liberals, winning significantly more seats versus that popular vote. So something interesting to see amongst your peer demographic in your province and what that's looking like so far. Of course, we're waiting to see what the overall demographic, the overall population of Newfoundland and Labrador choose as we continue to wait the results of this election.